Hi, สวัสดีครับ Yeah. This is such an honor that people actually turn up to listen to your research because usually they don't usually listen to your research. I was told whenever you do a popular article presentation, you get a big audience, but when you do a peer review articles, you have 5 audience. You have 5 people reading your stuff, and 2 of them are peer reviewer themselves. So this is it's such an honor to be given the opportunity to present. My research interests in the past, which I have changed, and most recently my studies are focusing more on economy among farmers and accessibility to education. But in the past, because I was working at Loma Linda University, my focus was more on the relationship between spirituality and mental health. So what I did was I usually interview many groups. So the primary variable is always religion and spirituality, and the other variable is depending on the population. So I have interviewed different populations. The first one was on HIV/AIDS patient in northern Thailand, and it was very interesting because my very first qualitative research was religious coping among Thai women with HIV/AIDS. And when I submitted my article to the publisher, I received the article back. It was all red. It was all red, and then there was this long comment, and my reviewer said, "You will never ever get this article published anywhere." And so I said, "This is a challenge. So I'm going to find a way to publish it." So it was finally published, but with a lot of sweat and tears. So a lot of the studies I did was research on. First was HIV/AIDS spirituality, chronic depression spirituality, chronic pain spirituality, hypertension spirituality, kidney disease spirituality. So this has been kind of a pattern of my research. And so sex workers, I did 2 research on sex workers and spirituality and religious coping. And this was one of the studies that was done. The second study was never published because I didn't have time to do so. But so let me go straight into the studies that I did on sex workers, religion, and the role of religion among sex workers in Thailand. So the first thing is, it was very difficult to get this to go through IRB itself because our IRB were very particular about the details you go into. I recall I did many revisions before IRB would approve my proposal. So once I received the IRB proposal, the proposal was that I would pay sex workers in order to get them to sit with me for 1 hour to interview them. So there was research funding that I received to proceed with this research. What was very interesting was that, so this is in terms of, so I'll not focus so much on results, but maybe on the procedure itself, because it was when you focus on very risky population, it becomes very difficult to try to access this population. So I recall my first question was, how am I going to find this population? Because it was difficult. So in Thailand, tuk-tuk drivers know everything. And so I said, I'm going to go and talk to a tuk-tuk driver. And so I stepped out from the hotel and met a tuk-tuk driver. He said, no problem. I know every place you need to go to. So I did. I got on his tuk-tuk. He took me to one particular lane in Chiang Mai. And he said, here, this is a good place. I stepped in. It was the title of the place, the name of the place was Karaoke Bar. But they do nothing about singing at all. They don't sing in this place. They do something else, right? So I stepped into this karaoke bar, and all of a sudden there was I don't know the name for it, but the person who facilitated, she came and she talked to me, and within like a minute, there were like 20 young women surrounding me. And I have never been surrounded by 20 young women before. And I was very excited because these were very good-looking young women surrounding me. But I was very nervous because, like, you know, I'm doing research here. So I whispered to the facilitator. She said, you know, can I come back? Can you give me your contact? So I got her phone number. I went back to the hotel. The next day I called her back and I said, you know, I'm not here to have anything. I want to interview. And she said, okay. And I said, I'm willing to pay by the rate that you charge them. So the lady said, okay, let me check with them. About 2 hours later, she called me back. She said, no one wanted to talk to you. So this is one of the issues where when you try to approach a very sensitive population, you have to really figure out a way you can have access to this population. Otherwise, it's going to be, you got to think through very carefully how you're going to approach certain populations. So I was very disappointed, and the tuk-tuk driver couldn't help me here at this point. So it was lucky enough. I have a friend. This is when connection really is important for you when you access certain population. I have a friend who owned a karaoke bar in Bangkok. So that was how I have access to. I interviewed 2 karaoke bar because I know the owner of these 2 places, and one was in Thonburi, one was in Bangkok itself. So let me go through one of the a few steps that I was looking at. So one of the first thing, you know, you go to a population and sometimes you don't have a good idea about the population you're trying to deal with until you start talking and researching and all that, and you find out a lot better. You have a better idea about who your population is. And I found out through literature and through also conversation that even when you're addressing the population, such as the girls that work in karaoke bar. So let me say a few words about karaoke bar. How many of you enjoy singing karaoke? Yeah, right. But this is not the kind of singing. This is a different kind of singing. So what I found out was they have what they call I can't remember, a quixote or something. So you have young girls who will come and perform dances at the stage, and they will also entertain clients at the same time. So when you look at this population, you find out that the young girls, sex work has a short lifespan, and so you can only work so much, and usually depend on the type of sex work. It usually you end up your career at 35, maybe 40 max, depending on what kind of sex workers you do. So among karaoke bar, you have a little longer career life because you're not so exhausting. I went to like a massage parlor, like a real massage parlor, and for those girls, I think by the time they hit 35, they could no longer function. So what you find is they really have to invest all the energy, really working really hard to earn enough money so that by the time they hit 35, it's gone. That makes sense? Yeah. So, but when you work with this population, a lot of them, the girls working in this bar, they can choose, which means they don't have to always entertain client. So what they do is they sit and drink with the client. But in going out with the client, they can choose whether they want to go out with the client or they can refuse the client. So the girls will tell me, you know, sometimes they will go in what they call dating first. So they go with the client, and if they don't like the client, then they will not sleep with the client. And if they like the client enough, they may choose to sleep with the client. That's where they earn a lot more money from their work. What I want to kind of go into will be methodology now. So after I did my IRB, I went on and I interviewed all these girls. So everything was recorded, it was transcribed. Each interview lasted like 40 to 45 minutes. It was all in Thai. So I would pass the IRB on to the every single interviewees that I had, and ask them and said, these are the procedures, and at any point if you're uncomfortable, you can stop the interview anytime, and there would not be any negative anything at all for you. So we went through all the items on our IRB so that they understand what the process was. This was an important process with very sensitive population. So after I went in, we recorded, and then I interviewed. I remember one girl, this is interesting, one of the girls, this will give you kind of a picture of what was happening. One of the girls said to me, she said, she must be in her 20, I think 21, I guess, at the time. And she said she grew up with a mother, and her mom was very kind to her, was very supportive of her until her mother passed away. And once her mom passed away, her dad refused to support her financially. And she said, I used to hate sex workers because I think they're lazy and they want easy money. And she said, now I understand sex workers better because I'm one of them. And there was just tears coming down her eyes. And she said, and now I kind of hate myself for having to do what I'm doing. So these are some of the experiences you go through when you deal with very sensitive population. But just on methodology itself, these are the results. What happened was after I transcribed everything from all the interviews, what I did was what we call a first level coding. And the first level coding is when you identify every line, every sentence that's being said, and you say, this sentence is about economy, this sentence is about hardship, this sentence is about struggle, this sentence is about religion. And so all the questions were open and ended questions. So when I identify, so the first layer of all the coding level is just to say what is being coded here. Then we went through a second layer of coding. The second layer of coding would be you look at a group of words that are similar. So you pull all these words that have similar concept and idea together into one. Yeah. So after you pull all the words and concept that have similar pattern into one, then what you do is you kind of analyze the text and you say, what is the pattern here? What do you see as pattern based on this transcribe? And just you have to keep in mind you're looking at about 12 transcription lasted about 45 minutes per transcription. So this is kind of a lot of work going through every single transcription again. And I think the practice, I think the easier way to do this would be after you have done the first 3 interviews, you kind of map up the pattern here. Is that, yeah. So after the first 3 interviews, you kind of go through the transcription very, very carefully. You kind of do some coding, and you do second level of coding. And then when you try to identify certain pattern, because these patterns will help you when you go back to interview the 4th and the 5th and the 6th person. It will give you a much clearer picture when you start coding, instead of waiting for everything and then you code it at one time. And so that was what we did. We did all the coding. I did the coding, analyzed the coding, and then map up 3 patterns that I noticed. And if you look in the research interviews in the document, there were 3 things that I discovered in the research from the transcription. The first was I forgot my research. The first was okay. The first was level of difficulties in life. So it was interesting when we start mapping this up. We discovered that there were 3 types of groups actually that was reflected in the studies. The first group was when These are girls who were really going through very difficult hardship in their life. They come up from their village at a very young age, and they, because of life difficulties, they didn't have much choice, and so they entered sex work. And you listen to the life pattern, you notice a lot of challenges, difficulties, and pain that they went through. The second group were a lot of factory workers. They migrate to Bangkok, work in a factory, and they realize that sometimes when they hit crisis, they couldn't afford the financial crisis, and so they decided that maybe sex worker was an option for them. The third population was younger girls who come to the universities, they go to school, but then the parent couldn't really help them that much. And so if you look at the three group, you discover that life difficulty among different groups differ from group to group depending on their location, depending on their social location. And this will have an impact on how they look at, how they cope with how they use religion to cope with their life. The second thing we discovered was, the second pattern was on the sense of conflict. This is, I think the interesting part was that the research, the question, the topic, research topic itself is kind of ironic because we don't usually think that if you're religious, you become sex workers, right? Does that make sense to you? It's like, why do a topic on religion and sex workers? Because if you're a sex worker, most likely you're not religious. Because if you're religious, then you become moral, right? You practice morality, and sex worker will be the last thing on your mind. So why would someone do research on religion and sex workers? And so, but what was very interesting was that when we started interviewing the population, like the majority of sex workers were very religious. So, and then what was interesting is the conflict, the sense of conflict inside of them. And so I asked them, I said, do you have an internal guilt and conflict? And they say yes. But what was interesting was that the kind of guilt and conflict was not because they were sex workers as much as the conflict had more to do with the fact that they were entertaining someone else's husband or someone else's boyfriend. So if they were entertaining a single client, they didn't have conflict. But if they were entertaining like someone else's husband, I feel bad for his wife. And sometimes they rationalize maybe the wife was nasty, maybe the wife never serviced him, so all kind of reasoning was happening. So the level of conflict was one very interesting thing that I discovered. The next one was on, so how religious are you? So if you look at this chart, the yellow represent level of difficulties in life. So just look at the chart, right? The second conflict, the level of conflict. The third, religiosity. So one being not religious, here being very religious, so a lot of conflict. So let me ask, as you look at this, what do you notice in this diagram? Oh. Oh, it's gone. Sorry. Okay, what do you notice? What do you? Ajahn.
Question from the audience that the 1 to 12 are the numbers
of sex workers are so number 1 to number 12.
So you interview 12 groups
Into 12 total.
at a different time.
Very close, within the period of 2 weeks. What do you notice? What pattern do you notice?
Level of conflict, experience of conflict, always equivalent to the religiosity.
The more conflicted you are, the more religious you are, right? Another pattern too is also in relation to difficulties in life, right? The more difficult your life is, the more religious you tend to be. The less difficult, the less religious. Yeah. That's yes? So my next question to you is, what is your hunch when you read this? What conclusion can you draw from? Lu Yang. You figure out? What as you reflect on this, what kind of conclusion do you? Because my conclusion is also guesswork, as any guess is as good, right? Yeah. Pardon?
Religious.
Say that again.
Majority of the centers are religious.
Right? The good conclusion. Majority of them are very religious, which is against our common sense, right? Our common sense, sex workers are not religious, but here it says sex workers are very religious. Any another deduction from? Yes.
In the majority of the cases, the levels for these three variables are the same.
Yeah. So if you have low difficulties, low conflict, low religious cities, for most of them, yes. Anything else? Any other perspective? Ajahn? Any theologians in here want to?
We have, if we were thinking, surface discussion. Okay. We'll see that the sense of conflict is equal to the sense of religiosity, and we think that the sense of conflict is created by the conscience part. The religions probably is the religious value tells them what you're doing is not right, and I think it's your religion that shaped that value, or your spirituality that shaped that value of what is right and wrong. And so, you see, the more religious they are, the greater the sense of conflict.
Yeah.
Maybe because of the values and the fact that you're doing something that is not
Right.
acceptable.
I think this is a good question where, let's say the population wasn't Buddhist population, or if they're atheists, would the results show the same way, right? There may be some question.
I think you could also say that it could be as their experience of conflict increased, then they return to religion.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it could be that.
The intensity as well. The more. So at the end of when I kind of analyzed all the transcription and all that, what was interesting to me was that religion was almost a rite of purification. It was a redemptive. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. So you don't have a choice to go to work because you need money, so you go to work. But then you accumulate this kind of level of guilt. You accumulate so much guilt. So what do? Is you go to religion, and religion purifies you, so that at the end of purification, you can come back and do whatever you're doing again, in order to sustain you through the whole process until you finish your career.
This is a question: how was religion or being religious defined in this study?
Okay, good question. Being religious here is defined in terms of activities. religious activities. So how often they go to church, to temples, how often do they perform merits, like tambun, chimai. So it's defined by activities they perform, how often they go, yeah. Yes. Oh, okay, all right. So, yes.
Just want to know, when you interviewed them, did you ask their religion specifically, or
Yeah.
it's just anonymous?
I did, yeah, so pretty much, yeah. But I didn't ask whether they have been practicing their religion since they're young. I didn't ask that question.
So in this survey, in this research, is it majority Buddhist?
Majority Buddhists from the place that I went to. Yeah, from the place I went to, yeah. There was an interesting study in Ecuador that was done, the same thing, but mostly it was a Catholic nation. And apparently the result is very similar, where sex workers were very religious, and God plays a very important role in their life because they need God who protect them. So that was, but I haven't done more analysis on that, so that's interesting. Yes?
I don't know, I'm just going to
Yeah.
another question. You mentioned the research in Ecuador, so my question was, did you develop the questionnaire or did you use questionnaires that had been used before?
I developed my own questionnaire.
So did you see other researchers and were all of your questions totally original, or do you have something to guide the questions that you asked?
Good question. That was so long ago, I don't quite remember. But yeah, I think it was literature based, kind of guided me in the way I developed my question. Yeah. But so, yes.
When you said level of difficulty, is it in difficulty in their work or which led them to this work?
Which led them to do this work?
But the other things, the experience, conflict and religiosity were during
Yeah.
the period of work.
Right.
The difficulty is before.
The difficulty is more in their life, in their personal life. Like.
I mean, the current life or
Both. Yeah. So the question I asked them is, at the point, and also looking back, I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the level of difficulty in your life? And so I think they put them together, both in the past and the present. Like this is their level of difficulty. But that's a good question because it will make a difference in the interpretation of the data. Yeah. So one of the interesting things was purification, right? That I thought was very interesting, and I think here's the significant thing about research that we do, because sometimes when we do good research, and I like to think this is good research. When we do good research, we learn new things that we don't expect. Like we think this is how it works, but when you start listening to people very carefully, you discover that there are things you learn from them that are very different from the past. One other thing I want to just point, and then I'll wrap it up for QA, is that if you look here, you look at number 9. Number 9 throw off the whole, like how do you explain number 9, right? Yes, you were thinking, right? How many of you were looking at that and were just wondering? So what are your thoughts? What do you think is happening there? Pardon? Any? So this person, life wasn't difficult for her, and she wasn't experiencing any conflict either, but she was very religious.
Maybe that's why.
Maybe the religiosity help her cope, right? Help her cope. That's a good point. Yes.
She was looking at the positive things.
That she was half glass full.
How much she is getting and so on, and she is able to satisfy others. So it's not my problem. I'm getting what I want, and they are getting what they want. That's all.
Yeah. Good interpretation. Yeah, I helped you, you helped me. We're all happy. Right? All right. Any other thoughts? Like, what might be some of the possible? Yes.
Maybe they experience redemption on a greater level
like a high level of redemption. But this is just speculation from my part because I didn't go back and talk to her again after I analyzed the data. But what I think I'll go back to what you've just said. I think at some point you kind of transcend certain social norm. At some point you kind of transcend social norm, and religion plays a very important role in how you in enabling you to transcend certain social norm. Let me just mention this. When I did all my studies about spirituality and different population, breast cancer, kidney disease, chronic pain, what I found was this: that so you have religion, and you have life experiences, and you have spirituality. Spirituality. So religion is almost like a belief system, and then you have your own life experiences. Spirituality is the path that crosses between religion and your life experience. Does that? Yeah. So you have what you think God is, then you have your life. Spirituality is in between. Spirituality is when you walk through your life and you hit so many difficulties in your life, and by the time you hit through so many difficulties in your life, you come to a better understanding of who you are and who God is. And I think this is where I think the path become very interesting, because I think at the end, religion sometimes gives you this very clear cut, what is right and what is wrong. Spirituality is when you go through a very dark part of your life, and the question becomes, can you see God even in the darkest part of your life? And so people who emerge out of all these difficulties are often people who have gone through certain length of journey before they arrive at this place. So it's not like, I read, I listen, I find, I understand. No, it's the people who really walk the journey that really come to a certain place of understanding of spirituality. So that's I should conclude, and then I want to open up for a question. Yes?
I just wanted to find out from your interviews, did you have any sense that any one of those was willing to get out of the sex working?
Yeah. The primary reason they are in is finance. So if they can figure out a way to finance themselves, they all get out. I don't think any one of them want to remain there. But due to the lack of accessibility, lack of resources, and then it's interpretation too, because younger generation define hardship very different from older generation. Yes. Any? Yes.
So for the scope, I believe it's the research was about qualitative.
Yeah.
And the number of specimens in this population. Do you think that is too small? Did you mention the scope of your study on a certain area?
Right.
Because maybe the experience in Chiang Rai, where the karaoke bar maybe is different.
Yes.
Or in
Yes.
Bangkok.
Yeah. And here I'm turning to my qualitative friends here, because it seems population qualitative studies are usually not generalizable. We usually is population specific, and the validity of the research is really population specific. And so I think you're right. If I go to Chiang Rai, there may be some common pattern. There may not be common patterns. Yeah.
You just said if they can find a way to finance themselves, they get out of it. But I have heard that suppose you can use a prostitute but not fall in love with them, right? So falling in love with a person who can love you back might be a way to escape that problem. So can you explain whether that can be a way out for them and if not?
This is interesting because like when you look at I don't know because I've never explored other countries, so I don't know how things happen in different regions and all that. But in Thailand, if you go and there again, there are many kind of sex workers. Certain sex workers can transform from sex work to marital relationship. So it does happen. It does happen in certain place, certain region, certain population, certain type of sex works. I know like working in a bar, sometimes it happens. Yes.
In Thailand, it's special.
Yeah, I know it happens, yes.
During your research, do you encounter any sex worker who voluntarily do it? Like they just want to be a sex worker?
Yes.
Facing any hardships?
Yes and no. I think I interview quite a lot of sex workers, and of all the sex workers I interview, I think there was one sex worker who said to me, she said, I enjoy my work. But this is out of like 30 something, maybe 40 something. Yeah, there's only one that I came across. Yeah. Yes. This is a very. I think this is like a moral question for us researchers. Like when you use the subject, what do you do afterward when you're aware of things they are going through, right? I think at the current stuff, I think we disseminate the results of our studies, hoping that through dissemination it can impact someone else in the future. But I think this is a bigger structural issues of our society that we need to look at. I think we need to be, in some ways, be an advocate for this population, knowing what they're going through. And because if you really look through a lot of issues, and it's not just these studies alone, if you look at a lot of issues, there are a lot of issues about inequality, injustice happening among this population, issues about accessibility, issues relating to even not just sex, I mean in education itself, the issues of social capital, cultural capital, economic capital. These play a lot of roles in how accessible we get into the system itself and make ourselves. So in some ways I think there's greater structural issues that we need to address. Yes?
Actually, from what you mentioned here, the study basically tries to find a relationship, if I had to call it, between money and morality. And from what you presented, you said many times, so the causative element of lack of low morals, that is the sex workers, is because of lack of money. Mm-hmm. But the Buddhist religion also, we have many monks who renounce the money element, and they have a high morality, so to speak. Does that give any lessons for how you possibly present the religion to people who are also interested in making money? Are they too in conflict? In the sense, can I really make money and be religious? I mean, that was a question asked by
good question. Yes, good question.
Because this is a practical problem. Everybody is chasing money,
and
everybody wants to be religious as well.
Right.
Are they in conflict?
And I think as you mentioned, or the studies has mentioned, the level of conflict is really high among people who are religious itself. So in a way, it is yes, because religion causes a lot of guilt feeling among them. I think, and I think your question too is like, but whether religion can also take them to a different place. Am I right way?
For example, now the Buddhist religion says you renounce your money element, then you become religious or you attain morality.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of, there are many people who go through that. But there are people like these people also who have practical needs and wants and desires, and they want money.
Yeah.
But they also want to be
Religious at the same time. Yeah.
Is there a possibility, from your interviews, did you find anything which they said, I can do both and still be okay?
I think except for that one person in the interviews, and I think the number 9, and this is one of the most perplexing issues, because I should have gone back to talk to her and find out what is it about her and the way she's thinking that put her in a place where there's some possibility there. Yeah. But I think your question deserves a bigger conversation, because it has a lot of other factors that we need to consider as well. My sense is that for a lot of the I should say victims, a lot of these workers themselves. In the second interview that I conducted, what I found very interesting was that oftentimes a lot of these people are doing minimum wage kind of work. They go to factories and they earn minimum wages. The problem and the primary reason they just choose to go into sex workers was an economic crisis. Every single case. So I can be sex workers, I get 300 baht a month, a day, and I can survive on and then all of a sudden my mom has cancer. What am I going to do? With my education, with my lack of skills, nothing. One option left for me is sex work, where I can earn enough money. And every single person I talk to, same thing, crisis, economic crisis. And if they didn't hit any crisis, they would not have gone in to become sex workers. But you can never predict, whether the crisis is going to happen to you. And they leave, they are stretched out financially, they live from paycheck to paycheck. So there's really no way for them to really accommodate. Yeah. But good question. Yes?
So when we see the data in Thailand, we see that the religion really expects them. But when you ask them based on how they would based on their work, they answer by the So it's not really related to, because when you ask them, they say religion is expect really much, but religion didn't stop them by the work. So how to say it's better to have religion make them stop the sexual.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing here, and it have a lot of theological implication for us to think through, because in this particular case, religion allowed them to continue what they do, because it was kind of redemptive for them, like a purification right for them to be able to. But I think at the same time, if they were able to get through the economic crisis, I think most of them would leave. Yeah. I think my time is up, right? Or
Okay, shall we give a round of applause? I think your research has helped us to understand what some of us may have only guessed, that many of the sex workers are led to their profession by circumstances beyond their control. And I would just like to remember, that's one of the reasons for education. We believe that education is not just to get a degree, but also to give you choices in life, so that when you are financially distressed, or when you experience economic crisis, you have more options than those people who never had a chance to go to higher education. And now let's pray for this. One of you was asking what do we do for these sex workers. We don't know them, but I think we can pray for all of them, because these are the people who are basically, what do you call that? Kept captive by their situations, by the circumstances they are in. And we believe that we have a responsibility to respond to the situations we see. But we probably say, oh, we are here, what can we do? And I think we can begin by start praying for them. And maybe we have energy. I know Andra actually provides education for young girls so that they have skills and they have education and training so that they never have to go into this kind of situation. So I think there are people who are working hard to keep the girls safe, to give them choices in life so that when situations are difficult, that will not be an option for them. They will have other choices. But one of them certainly that we can give to them is education.
If I can add, like one of the question was, how can we help? And I think if we as a university or other university can make education a lot more accessible to people who to underprivileged people in a direct or indirect way, we are really helping this population.
Let me see if I was fantastic doing praying. Somebody else is praying or? Sorry. I know I was supposed to.
I'll just say 2 words afterwards.
Oh, okay, after the prayer. Okay, well then we invite Saraburi. But thank you everyone for coming to support the first series. I said, the person next to me, and I said, well, this is a popular seminar. And he said, first, this is the first one, and second, there is lunch. Provided for those who will sign up. But we also have a very informative and very, interesting subject, understanding the minority among us, those who are oftentimes looked down by the majority. I'll give the time now.
Yeah, just 2 seconds. Just to reiterate, thank you everyone once again for coming. Thank you, Dr. Swat, for your presentation. I'm sure that we have all learned something, and we're all from different backgrounds, which is really lovely. We're all from different faculties, we're all from different backgrounds, different interests, but we can learn something because somebody has gone, they've asked questions, and they've learned about the lives of individuals, and we wouldn't have access to that information if somebody did not go and ask the questions. You know, and each one of us can be that person to go and ask the questions, and we can learn from the responses that we receive. We can share with each other, even though we are not the researcher. We can share and learn about people in different walks of life and in different situations, and it broadens our perspectives as well. So I think that's the huge value in these research seminar series. So I want to encourage you, you know, and Rita just talked about, oh, there's a lot of people here. Will there be a lot of people here next month?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I just want to encourage you to come out next month. We're going to take a completely different track. We're going to go all scientific on you. And Dr. Kung is going to be taking our next seminar, okay? So I'm sure we're all looking forward to that. So research is about investigation and process and a problem, and how to go about kind of exploring that. And every piece of research does that. And so we can all learn, whatever research we are interested in, we can all learn from that process. So please do come out next month and the month after. October is going to be slightly different because we have the conference, but we'll tell you way in advance how it's going to be organized. So thank you very much, and please keep coming and keep supporting, and let's build our research community.